Okay, as I said, I want to just run through a few suggestions that you might like to try next week. I think please not be reading, listening. To make best use of next week, considering that neither of these mocks are going to be comprehensive, so neither of them are going to be 100% useful to you in terms of identifying gaps, we need to at least use them to hone your test taking skills so that you make sure you get the marks that you can get, whatever that is, okay, on the paper. So these are a few ideas for you to try out. Most of them are based on sound research. Start off with just the specification from the syllabus. That's all fairly straightforward. You are replying to multiple provided items, questions, scenarios and problems. It's worth noting that this is not just objectives 1 and 2, describe and explain and apply understanding of, but the external exam does ask 1, 2, 3, 4, which makes it basically, essentially, able to cover the same field as the data test. Objective 3 is analyse evidence, so trends, patterns, relationships, limitations or uncertainty of evidence, of data, and interpret evidence, so draw conclusions based on analysis. Now, the vast majority of the test is going to be objectives 1 and 2, describe, explain and apply understanding. In other words, tell me things and solve these problems. But you can expect to see data sets and you to be asked to analyse or interpret them. Okay, so you need to be aware of that. The exam consists of 2 papers. Each paper consists of a number of different types of possible items. Now, because the sample and the mock that the QCAA put out on their 2 papers, on both of their 2 papers, they have 20 multiple choice plus 25 marks of short answer on the first paper and 45 marks of short answer on the second paper. Because that's what the sample looked like, that's what everybody's looks like at the moment. All the mock exams that we have commissioned and seen all look like that. The QCAA does not commit to that being the marking breakdown. Okay? What they say is you will have some multiple choice and some short answer. And on the physics exam, you shouldn't have extended answer. So there shouldn't be anything requiring more than a paragraph or 2, nothing requiring 300 or 400 words. Okay? There shouldn't be. So the short response items here says requiring single word, sentence and paragraph responses, calculating using algorithms, interpreting graphs, tables and diagrams, responding to unseen data and or stimulus. So questions could take any of those forms. I suspect the distribution will be something pretty close to that. All right? They're just not committing to it because they don't want to limit the number of questions they can ask each year. Yep.
Is there a difference between paper 1 and paper 2? Or is it just split up?
There's no difficulty difference or anything like that, as far as I can tell. Yeah. There's no topic difference in the sense that it's not broken up into topics or anything like that. No.
And so you can use calculator on both?
Yes, but we're going to talk about calculators in a minute. Okay. So the conditions are that each paper is 90 minutes plus 10-minute perusal. So I want to talk today about how you use 100 minutes, not 90 minutes for these papers. You are allowed to have a QCAA approved graphics calculator. but we'll talk about that in a minute. And I've got a list of, finally, yesterday, we got a list of the allowed and prohibited materials for your exam. Okay? These are the allowed equipment for your assessments. Black or blue pen, 2B pencil, sharpener and eraser. You need a 2B pencil for any multiple choice because the multiple choice are machine read. And a 2B pencil is soft enough or it's dark enough for the machine to read, and soft enough for you to be able to erase it, hopefully, completely, if you need to make a change. Okay? Black or blue pen must be used for all written responses. Pencil can only be used for drawing or multiple choice. You are allowed highlighters, a clear plastic ruler, water in a clear unlabelled bottle, and an asthma inhaler, which I wouldn't recommend unless you have asthma. You may use a clear plastic container or Ziploc bag to carry your equipment. Now, please note, if you are currently using erasable pens, get rid of them. Get used to writing with something different. You need to be used to writing with whatever you write in these exams. Okay? It needs to be your usual mode of writing. Jax, what are you doing?
Just taking notes.
You've got it in front of you. Sorry? Okay, so you are not allowed mobile phones, smartwatches, fitness trackers, any other electronic device. You're not allowed correction fluid or correction tape. Okay? Dictionaries, erasable pens are prohibited. Blank paper, notes, tissues you can't take in, we have to supply you. Okay? Erasable pens, it's really important because the test papers are machined after you use them, all right, which will erase most of the erasable pens. So it's pretty clear that you don't use them, all right? So that's just the technicalities. Now, I've just put down some ideas. There'll be a lot more of this later on, but I've just put down some ideas about what do you do before the exam block, during perusal, when you're working, at the end and checking, and afterwards. So, with your graphics calculator, you use a CG50AU, do you? Is that the one? Or GC or whatever it is, yeah.
CG50AU.
50AU, okay, which is on the approved list. All right. At the moment, in the instructions, there is no instruction to supervisors to put them in exam mode in particular, but there is an instruction that calculators be cleared of memory before being taken into the assessment room. And in the directions for administration, it says that that must be done by a suitably qualified teacher on entry to the exam room. Okay? Now, to the best of my knowledge, there is no way of clearing those calculators that isn't putting them in exam mode. Okay? And the added complication, we're still waiting, right? We've been waiting for a response on this for a while. We're still waiting for it. But I'll tell you this. If you look at the description of what's an allowed calculator, it says these ones are allowed, these ones aren't. Any ones that aren't on the list, if they are able to do these things and can't be put into an exam mode, then they can't be used. Okay? And on the list is storage of text. All right? Now that means if you're using a calculator that's not on the list and it is able to do, well, algebraic calculations, algebraic manipulations, differentials and integrals, storage and retrieval of text, then you can't use it unless you can put it in exam mode. So to me, the only logical conclusion is, since yours can do those things, it needs to go in exam mode. It will be required.
So
Yep.
can our calculators do integrals in exam mode?
No,
They can't.
I don't think so.
I don't know whether
They can do definite integrals probably, but not symbolic manipulation.
I don't think ours can. No.
Okay, But they can certainly store and retrieve text, can't they? Yes? So I think the safest thing is to assume that your calculator will be in exam mode for the real test. Okay? And I just think that the QCAA hasn't got their act together yet in terms of prescribing that. The second point on that slide is I think you should become very familiar with the content of the formula and data book. You're going to have it in both exams. If you're going to use it, you can't be flicking through it looking for things. You need to know exactly where things are. You can't take in things like post-it notes or tags or anything like that. However, you need to, if you're going to use it, and this is particularly more so in chemistry where you're going to have to use it for data, but if you're going to use it in physics, you need to be familiar with it beforehand. So I would get in the habit of using it for the month before the exam if you think you're going to need it. Okay. I would just refer you to the method that I've shown you before of planning out an exam block. There's a short 8-minute video summary of that on the tutorial page. If you want to refresh on how to plan out your time around an exam block and maximise your study use. I would make this other point, and it's pretty clear from the research. It is worthwhile to eat well and to get plenty of sleep. Okay, particularly the plenty of sleep bit. Pulling all-nighters around exam block is a disastrous thing to do. It virtually guarantees that you will forget the stuff that you looked at that night. Okay. A complete cycle of non-REM and REM sleep is apparently essential to memory storage. All right. It's why sometimes you try something, even a physical skill, time after time after time, and you can't do it, but tomorrow you can do it. Because in both physical skills and cognitive skills, during REM sleep, the brain apparently rehearses that, and that's where the connections are made to enable you to be able to do it the next day. So, yell out if you've got any questions or comments or anything at any point. In perusal, what do I suggest you do? Well, you are not able to write or use a calculator during perusal. Okay? So you may not touch a pen or a calculator during perusal, but it's 10 minutes out of the 100. So it's 10% of the time you're sitting in the room. Okay? So I suggest you do these 4 things. First of all, flick through the entire paper and have a look what's on it. That relieves, well, we'll get into each of these. Work out your timing for the exam. Make a plan of attack. Which questions are you going to do first? Which ones are you going to leave till later? And start some questions. Okay? Let's look at each one of these in turn. As soon as you can open the paper, flip through, see what's on it, see what you like, see what you don't like. See what seems easy, what seems hard. Okay? At that point, I'd make sure you got the formula and data book and it's the same format as what you've had, that you know where everything is. Okay? Simply, and I think you would have this experience, simply seeing the paper sometimes relieves the anxiety while you're sitting there waiting to start to look at it. Right? Once you see it, you at least know what you're up against, and that's worthwhile doing all the way through. Okay? I would suggest that part of that first check, and you'll probably be instructed to do that, is to check that all the numbers are in order. You know? That you've got questions 1 to 20 and then questions 21 to 27. You'll probably be instructed to do that, to check that the paper is correct. All right? That's how they used to instruct everybody to do the QCS. I think it's worthwhile doing that just to make sure that, not to check the paper, but to make sure that you have seen all the questions on the paper, that you're not missing a page or something like that. All right? Secondly, work out the timing. Now, if it's those marks, that's easy. 45 marks and 45 marks is 2 minutes per mark. Okay, roughly. Now, if it's not 45 and 45, during perusal you've got to do a quick calculation and you can't touch your calculator. Okay, so just see, if it's more than 45, then it's less than 2 minutes a mark. If it's less than 45, it's slightly more than 2 minutes a mark. Just think of it that way. Okay, and then set yourself a rough plan. All right, now it might be you've got 20 multiple choice, and then you've got a 1 mark question and a 2 mark question and a 5 mark question and so on. I would not suggest that you go through and say, okay, well 20 marks that's 40 minutes. Now that's 2 minutes. This is 4 minutes. No, I wouldn't get scrupulous to that degree. I'd say, okay, your multiple choice, you've got 40 minutes to do it. Yes? If it's 2 minutes a mark. And then I'd say, all right, well that's about 8, so let's say 15 minutes on those questions, 15 minutes on this block, 15 minutes on that block. In other words, just chunk them into a 10-minute or 15-minute block, because you can't watch the clock and see, oh, this is 2 minutes now and it's 3 minutes now. That you're going to be distracted. But you can keep an eye on 15-minute blocks and know whether you're ahead or not. Okay. So try and get a figure of what the timing is. Now you have to do that in conjunction with the third step, which I think is make a plan of attack. You do not have to do the questions in order. Some people, I know, prefer to do harder questions first and try and get them out of the way. I don't. I prefer to do the easier ones first, because that gives me a bit of a boost and probably some time up my sleeve. You know, if I've got 10 marks of what I think are easier questions and I know what to do, then I can spend maybe 15 minutes on it instead of 20 minutes and get some confidence out of it. So some people attack harder ones first, others attack easy ones first. That's my preference. But you decide what order to do things in. What do you got up? You don't have to decide the order of every question. All right, but it can make a difference if you've got 7 questions. It can make a difference if you think, well, I'll do questions 1 and 5 first, and then I'll do all the others in order. You know, you don't have to sit there and say, oh, look, I should do 3 before 7, and then I should do 8 first. And no, you don't have to spend all your time doing that, but have a look at it and see, are there some you'd want to do first? Okay? You just don't need to do them in the order that they're presented. But whatever you plan, guys, use this as your overall strategy. You always want to make sure that you get the ones you should get. Okay? So if you plan to do the hard ones first, don't ever allow that to turn into you've run out of time for the ones you know. Okay? You want to make sure that you get the marks on the ones you know. And if you're going to lose any marks, it should be on the ones that are hardest to you. Okay? All right. Now, part 4. If you go to any exam centre across Queensland, towards halfway through perusal, you will see a whole lot of people, guys and girls, staring at the ceiling, waiting for the exam to start. That is crazy. Okay? I don't care what the questions are. I know you can't use pen and calculator, but there's some questions on that paper that you can start without writing and without using a calculator. Okay? It could be multiple choice. All right? Multiple choice questions are definition type multiple choice. We haven't got to do any calculations. All right? If when the supervisor says, you may now start writing, you can immediately blacken 5 multiple choice questions, you're ahead of most people in the state. If when they say you may start writing, you can immediately start writing the answer to a short answer question, because you've read the question, considered it, mentally planned, I need to say this, this and this. If you can immediately write it down, you're ahead of everybody else in the state, or most people in the state. Okay? I'm sure you guys have done this, with a fingernail on your multiple choice booklet, not on the answer booklet, but on the question booklet, with a fingernail you can make a mark against A, B, C, D, so that you can then just transfer that to your answer sheet as soon as they say you can write. Okay? When I was training guys for the QCS, I always got them to get a guitarist one longer fingernail, so that, right? The books are fairly shiny, they're not like these. So you can make that indentation beside A, B, C, D quite easily and just mark what you're going to put on the response book. Okay? Have you not been doing that in exams? Oh, for God's sake. You stare at the ceiling. How's that been for you? All right. Can you take my point? Right. You can turn a 90-minute exam into a 95-minute exam by just doing some of the questions. Right. You've got 10 minutes perusal. It doesn't take you 10 minutes to do all the other stuff. 5 minutes tops. 5 minutes you can start the exam. Okay. In the exam itself, these are the instructions for the multiple choice. Choose the best answer for questions 1 to whatever it is, 15 to 30. This section has so many questions and with so many marks. Use a 2B pencil to fill in A, B, C or D. Answer bubble completely. If you change your mind or make a mistake, use an eraser to remove your response and fill in the new answer bubble completely. Guys, it is really important that you recognise these are marked by machine. So you do not make any stray marks on the answer sheet. Now the answer sheet is inside the response book of the first paper. There's the multiple choice answer sheet, and then there'll be the short answer questions for you to answer. So replacing your multiple choice sheet is not simple. It requires you to replace your whole booklet, which could mean you have to write out answers again. Okay? These booklets are all perforated and they're, as I said, they're machined. They're torn apart and the multiple choice questions go to one place and the short answers get divided up to other places. When you're using the multiple choice page, if you want to come back to a question, mark it in the question booklet. Don't put a line beside that row on the answer sheet, because you might forget to rub it out. And if you forget to rub it out and there's 2 marks and one is close to D when you really had answer B, then the machine might reject it. Okay? Reject that row because you've got 2 marks in that row. You've got 2 black marks. All right? Similarly, however, if you put down your answer as A and you want to make it B, you need to make sure you've got a really good rubber. And even so, sometimes you end up making a hell of a mess. If you do that, I think it's really worth going through the palaver of getting a replacement book. If you can, I don't know, I'm presuming it's allowed. Because if you can't, if your new answer is not substantially darker than what you've tried to rub out, then the machine will misread it.
Are we going to see, after the exam, how they marked it? Like, what questions we get right or wrong?
No, you're not going to see what questions you get right or wrong, I wouldn't guess.
Will we get our mark for just the exam?
You'll just get a total mark for the exam, I believe. And probably sometime early next year, they would release a marking scheme, but that's all. Okay.
Why don't we get our paper back?
You never get your paper back. Or do you get from an external exam as a score.
What if they say we got like this much marks, and in the marking scheme we like think we did this, then
Too bad. Okay. Multiple choice could have stimulus or a data set, somewhat like the data test. Okay. Need to make sure you read any such material closely and actively. Now, in both that and the questions, don't please just sit there looking at the page. You work a paper actively, all right? Now, whatever system you want to develop, and we're going to give you practice at this after the first mock, but whatever system you want to develop, work out a system and stick to it. This is what I do. I underline key terms in the questions and I circle cognitive verbs. What do I have to do? I circle that, okay? Similarly, in the short answer, here's an example. I underline important stuff. I circle cognitive verbs. I put a square around cues. Now, the simple act of, always, whenever you read a question, underlining the important stuff, circling the cognitive verb, draws you into it and means that you're less likely to misinterpret the question. Okay?
why did you cross out C and D? Like, did you do that
Oh,
at the beginning?
I'll tell you here. So actively work the question, all right? As soon as you read the question, there are occasionally or often options that you can rule out. Anything that you can eliminate in a multiple choice question, hopefully, increases your chances of getting it right, even if you have to guess. Okay? The fact that you can eliminate that the gradient is not going to be the threshold frequency or the power of the light incident on the metal surface means, well, now it just comes down to Planck's constant or the work function. Okay? And incidentally, it's A. So just be careful. I'm going to give you a few questions in class and get you to practice this after the mock. Actively working a question, all right? It takes energy, but it increases your focus and makes it less likely that you're going to make a mistake.
Sorry, what exactly do you mean by actively work?
I mean, if you've got a question, you're not just sitting there like this. You're saying, okay, I have to do that, and that's the height, and that's, yep, and okay, so I need to take that cue, and you just work it, right, actively. And what it does, if you can get into the habit of doing that with questions, what it does literally is ensure that you're focused on what the question is asking you to do, okay? If you're just sitting back looking at the question and thinking, okay, I'll read that and I'll look at that and so on, you can very easily drift off and miss a cognitive verb or miss a cue. Okay. I have some experience of this. For 25 years here, I've prepared the seniors for the QCS test. Okay. The multiple choice performance and the short response performance was always much better once guys use these sort of cues, these sort of tips. Okay. So if you've got a data set, actually actively identify, oh, this is, it says in the text that it's maximum kinetic energy of photoelectrons, but it's by 10 to the minus 19 joules. I need to notice that. And this is by 10 to the 14 hertz. I need to notice that. Okay. Now, on this page, which part of this is a student likely to miss? Statistically across the state, this sort of analysis was done after every QCS test, and it was consistent that these first two lines were not read by a significant number of people. every test. Okay? And yet, often, those first two lines contain some context which makes interpretation of the graph critical. All right? It could be, for example, that it says this is the graph for sodium, but then the question asks, how would this differ for aluminium or something? And if you're not tuned into that sort of context, you can easily misinterpret the question. We have a tendency, psychologically, we have a tendency to say, okay, question 5, look at the graph. Oh, here's the question. In other words, to skip over what might be some important background.
In this case, though, it doesn't really matter, those top two.
In that case, it doesn't really matter, no. Okay. But time and time again, it can.
Yeah.
Okay, for the short answers, now the instructions are these. Write using black or blue pen. Respond in paragraphs consisting of full sentences. I think that is a nonsense statement, but I wouldn't advise you to not do it because of that. All right? There are 7 objectives in the syllabus, and number 7 is communication, and it is not assessed on the external exam. Communication is not assessed on the external exam. Now, what the QCAA officers say at the moment is, you can't demonstrate objectives 1, 2, 3, 4 without communicating clearly, and therefore, communication is part of that. Okay? You can't demonstrate your analysis or your interpretation or your application of the knowledge without communicating. And communicating is using significant figures and units and getting the calculation right. But I believe, first of all, there would only be few questions that you would be responding in paragraphs for, because there would only be a few questions that would suit that. Right? Most of the questions, I think, will be calculation-based, or many of the questions will be calculation-based. So where possible, respond in paragraphs consisting of full sentences is okay. But I fail to see how they could justify penalising you if you didn't. All right? You need to get used to the fact that you will have a spare piece of writing paper, but it will not be able to be collected. So don't do any answers on that. We've been starting to do this with our exams, so you're used to it. You have spare pages at the back. If you want to redo something, you put a diagonal line through it like it says, and you put the amended answer on the black pages at the back. If the question you're answering had a template, like a graph or something like that, there will be one reproduction of that in the blank pages at the back for you to use. If you don't cross out your original response with a single diagonal line through your work, then they will mark it and ignore what's on the remaining pages.
So if you did 2, they would still mark that.
I'll mark the first one, unless you have it crossed out with a single diagonal line. Okay? That's the secret code that says don't mark this.
Secret code.
So
Yeah.
if you accidentally cross it out, but you do another line, then they'll mark it.
No. I wouldn't risk that. If you accidentally cross it out, I would repeat it in the back. Okay, once again. On the short answer, pay careful attention, work closely with the stimulus material in the data set. Actively work the question. Pay careful attention to the cognitive verb. I would get yourself a system. Circle it or highlight it. And I wouldn't use highlighters because that involves you putting down pens and picking up highlighters. I'd just work with one pen and work out a system of circling, underlining, whatever it is. Now, this is important, and it's something that I think has been overlooked and ignored. When you're trying to work out what the question is asking, look at the response space. The response space that they provide gives an indication of what type of response you're looking for. If it's got lines like this, you know, they're looking for text. If it's only that long, they're looking for 20 to 30 to 40 words of text. This says show you're working, so they're looking for a calculation. It's got an answer box, and I believe all quantitative questions will have an answer box like this that I used on the data test and so on. And it will tell you to how many decimal places or significant figures that you need to give your answer in most cases. And in most cases, it will give you the units. Now, that's a bloody clue if you don't know how to do the question. Look at the units. If the units are Newton seconds, as in momentum, then it's a good guess you've got to multiply force by distance. If these are meters per second, then you start to understand what we're talking about with velocity, you know? Don't give up any piece of information that the question gives you. Also, looking at the marks, there's 3 marks for this question. Now, it's not a hard and fast rule, but if there's 3 marks for a question, they're usually looking for 3 things. So if it says, give reasons why, blah, 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 and it's 3 marks, try and give 3 reasons. Okay? It's not a hard and fast rule, but it's the way the QCAA thinks in terms of the marking scheme. Because there's no half marks, you either get 3, 2, 1 or 0 on the question. It is most convenient to a marker if 3 marks are awarded for 3 things. Therefore, you can easily see that the person deserves 2 or 1 or 0 or 3. Okay? So it's not a hard and fast rule, but if it's allocated 3 marks, think of 3 things. Okay, at the end. Now, when you're planning out the timing, I would hope that you could plan to have 10 minutes at the end of the exam, 10 minutes at the end of the 90 minutes. If you do have that sort of time, and that's probably luxurious, but if you do have that sort of time, then there are things that you can do in that checking time that will help your marks. I do checks in this sort of order. I personally would go to every question I found easy first and make sure I got them out. If I had these questions that I found really easy and these questions I found really tough and these questions I couldn't do, if I've got time at the end, I'm not going to look at these. If I couldn't do them 10 minutes ago, what makes you think I'm going to be able to do them now? On the other hand, I thought I could do these 15 brilliantly. I want to make sure I haven't done anything stupid in those 15 and inadvertently lost marks. So I would go back and check cognitive verbs, units, scales, redo calculations just to make sure that whatever ones I thought I got, I definitely got. Okay? Then, if I had time, I'd recheck calculations, not just look at them, but re-key them, because you could make an error doing that. And then, only then, would I check the ones that I couldn't get earlier. I might have had a brainwave, something might come to me, that's a yes, but to me that would be after, in priority, after making sure I've got all the ones I should get. In the multiple choice paper, before the 90 minutes are up, and there should be a warning, 10 minutes or so, before the 90 minutes are up, go through with your ruler and just make sure you've got one answer and only one answer to each question. And then Have a look at any 3 in a row or any pattern. Anywhere you've got A, B, C, D in a row, or D, C, B, A in a row, or 3 A's or 4 A's. Okay. Sorry? Well, they might do, but I think it's a good place to start. If they're randomising properly, and I did this study over 20 years with the QCS, I kept monitoring it, they never had more than 3 in a row of any multiple choice in any paper over 20 years. Okay, so that's 40 odd papers. If you have 3 in a row, I'd just have a look at those questions and see you haven't made a silly error. If you've got 4 in a row, I can guarantee you probably, no, I shouldn't say that with the QCAA at the moment.
Guarantee you probably.
I could be pretty confident if you've got 4 B's in a row, that one of them shouldn't be a B. Now, I'm not saying which one. You look at those 4 questions and you think, oh, have I made an error on one of those? Because 2 B's, a C and a B is not a pattern anymore. I'll try and not be offended by the fact that you're packing up while I'm still talking, guys. In the short answer, in papers 1 and paper 2, if you've got time at the end, check again each cognitive verb and make sure that if it says calculate, you've calculated. If it says identify the mathematical relationship, you've come up with a y equals something x plus c. Okay? Check the answer box, check the cues. Make sure that you've done what you've been told to do. And don't leave any question blank. Put down something. Put down something on that topic. Okay? Don't leave any answer blank at all. In the short answer, you need to be very careful about not spending more time on a question than it deserves. Okay? If you have no idea about a question, if you honestly look at a question and I think I've never seen this, this is not in our course, then leave it and move on. All right? Do not endanger questions that you should get by spending too much time on a question that you have no idea about. Now, later in the program, we'll talk through other strategies, particularly in physics. What do you do when you have no idea what to do? What do you do for a question? You've got time. You look at the question and you think, I have no idea how to do this. There are strategies that you can use. We'll look at those later on. Now, after the exam, we're going to focus on giving you feedback on the content, yes, any gaps in the knowledge, but also about the way you've completed the responses. You need to have a look at that, but you also need to bring to the table your own assessment after next week of how you actually approach the parts of the exam and what worked for you and what didn't. So next week, you need to take what we call a metacognitive approach to doing the exams. Do the exams and focus on them, but also, for example, at the end of each exam, step back for a moment and say what went well, what went wrong. What did I do that helped me? What did I do that didn't help me? Okay? All right. The key thing is next week is a learning exercise. Across all your subjects, I think, but particularly in the sciences, it's a learning exercise. We need to be ready to hit the ground running as soon as you come back on the following Tuesday. Come back to classes. Now, those guys who haven't completed the survey, please do it today. The dot point survey. Okay. Good luck next week. That's day 87. If only the coronavirus numbers were going the same way as your day numbers, you'd be right.
They'd be going down.
How many cases do we have today? One more.
Wait till the days to our exam. Equal the number of coronavirus.
87 days, like.
Thanks, sir.
I saw one case this morning.
Yeah, I saw one. So was that from outside related to the?
No, it was related to this. It was a person who was related to somebody who went to one of those restaurants. Not even the person who went to one of those restaurants.
So would you rather do a question that, we'll come back to a question that you got like 2 or 3 marks on, opposed to one you got 1 mark on?